So I'll just start with a roll call. Gordon Brockway.
Present.
Scott Hopkinson is absent. David Hessel.
Present.
Gail Heyer.
Present.
And myself, Mark Howell. So we need a volunteer clerk for this evening.
I can do it.
Thank you, Gail.
Okay.
Thank you.
And,
I'll go to the next one.
okay, I appreciate it. And Scott did distribute minutes from November 11th in draft form almost immediately after our meeting last week. And I've had a chance to look at them and made a few mostly typo changes. I'm thinking though that we shouldn't proceed with trying to approve them in his absence, since he was the clerk and would have to make updates. So and I'm not quite sure what the holdup is around October 7th, but there seems to be an issue that he hasn't quite explained to me. So we still have, other than that, we've approved all of our minutes. So that's last week and one date and the kind of distance passed. So I'm going to suggest we kind of skip over minute approval tonight unless anybody has a concern. Okay, our next meeting is scheduled for December 2nd. Be on the lookout for that. I think this might have been the last of the Zoom meetings that's on the exact same Zoom ID and password, so there may be a change there, but December 2nd, 2 weeks from tonight at 6:30 p.m. Does anybody have any concerns about that? No, good. And lastly, on the, well, second to last on the sort of chair's report things, I have been in contact with Erin Stevens, and she's working on a mock-up of a web page for our committee. Would have the basic information, most of which is already associated with the agendas on the reference page, things like the charge and a reference to Article 41 and some of the other materials that we've reviewed in previous meetings will go up. We would have the names and associations or affiliations as far as our charge goes listed there, but not email addresses. There's a form that can be used to collect comments on a web page, which would then in the background be able to be emailed either to the chair or the entire group. And she's going to mock that up for us and let us take a look at it. So that's the plan. She hasn't given me a specific time to have that finished, and so we don't have it yet today, but that's the progress on the web page from last week's discussion. Okay, and lastly for tonight, Mary Hartman is with us from the Finance Committee, as you know, and she had done some analysis last week that in the last week that she wanted to share. And as you probably know, the Finance Committee meets at 7 p.m. And so she'll have to leave us within about 20 minutes. So I thought if everybody's okay with it, we would go ahead and let Mary raise her comments now so that we could get the benefit of her input.
Thanks, Mark. Just to clarify my role, I am the FinCom observer, which means I just share with you my observations. I'm not a voting member of your task force.
I understand. Sorry, didn't mean to.
That's okay. That's okay. I just wanted everybody else to know that my observations are there, and hopefully they're helpful to you. I'm late to this meeting, to this group, but I have watched all the videos that were available, and I have reviewed all of the financials that were posted on the enterprise budget books and all the other documents that Mark has made available to us. And I do have a few observations. I think so far, it seems that this business model is profitable. It has a good profit margin. It has a good return on investment. But going forward, I see that there are some challenges that you're facing, and it's good to be aware of those now. As you know, you are an enterprise fund within an enterprise fund, which means that any of your operating costs and your capital needs to be covered by your ratepayers. So what that means is that you've got to have a business model that pays for itself. And the first problem I see going forward is the conversion rate, as far as how many people that actually have fiber available to them are taking advantage of the offering for high-speed internet. And that rate of 20% isn't going to generate the revenue you need to grow. You need, and the reason for that is simple. I mean, the CMLP is a utility, and they don't hire people that do marketing and sales. And if they did, it would be a waste of money because they don't need that. But broadband does. So getting that expertise is going to be is something that you need to think about. How do you fund getting that expertise? Where do you get that expertise? I don't think it's going to come from CMLP. And again, these are my opinions. You can use them or not. The second challenge I think you're facing is that as you expand beyond areas where you're already served by fiber and you get into the places that have greater density, like the multiple unit dwellings, you're going to have to get those condos usually to make capital investments. And as we know, it's notoriously difficult to get a group of condo owners to agree to large capital investments. So that I know you've talked about incentives, and I'm sure that will help. But again, incentives is another cost to your business model. So something that you'd have to think about balancing. And the third challenge I think you've got going forward is that once you became successful where you expanded as far as you could within Concord, then you're going to have staff that maintains that. And are you going to have critical mass in order to afford that staff? So I guess I would say that the best approach might be a phased approach and going in and saying first of all, how do we make sure that we convert more people? And then where is the next place we move into where we think that the capital investment needed to break ground there and the revenue we would get would give us enough extra cash to make the next move. So it would be a phased approach. So those are basically the observations that I've had going forward based on what I observed in my experience in the world before I retired. So if anybody has any questions, I'd be happy to discuss it.
Yeah, so one just term of art, I guess, for the broadband business is what you refer to as a conversion rate. Yep. Is often referred to as take rate.
Take rate, okay.
So it's a simple ratio of how many subscribers do you have based on how many potential subscribers you have for a given street. So if you could do 10 houses on a street and you have 3 subscribers, the take rate would be 30%.
Yep, and right now I think your take rate is running about 20.
Yeah, I think it'd be an interesting thing to do because the data that we've been working with up until now has been more specific about, or the data that we've brought forward this fall actually has been more specific about how many actual parcels do we serve and how many addresses are on those parcels. So one could compute a more accurate take rate than kind of what we had before, because normally you wouldn't include in a take rate someplace that's impossible to serve, like Concord Green, for example. So you should exclude those, and I haven't actually tried to calculate it. That actually brings me to one more thing, I think, kicking off, and I think your points lead us to today's discussion, which are barriers to subscription growth. But this morning, the Light Board met, as it does monthly, and Gordon was there, and I asked him to distribute, and Gordon, I don't know whether you actually sent this to Mary, so with your permission, I'll forward it on. But sure. There was a broadband update at the meeting, and I'm quickly trying to find that document. There it was. as of this morning, this November broadband update is dated November 7th on the document. I guess I might as well just share it. Let's do that. And this was from Greg Marcinek, the broadband coordinator. So there are 1,535 active accounts. There's a breakdown of what service level of the 4 service levels is each account is residential accounts. And I believe from my notes, it's not summarized on here, but he said that there were 1,402 residential accounts and another 133 business accounts. And what was interesting as well was that they are apparently on a pace to add plus or minus 27 accounts per month, which of course is a little bit higher than was reported in last week's meeting when they had given us 34 accounts across the months of September and October. And also relevant to the growth of the service is that a new network technician started on November 8th. So I guess a day after this account, that brings that complement of workforce to 4. And the network engineer that they have hired is going to start this coming Monday. And I think the reason that that's quite important is there's been a real staff shortage at the light plan, and particularly in the broadband business. So we've seen the growth rate, and there were some comments about backlog as well. Apparently they've solved 50 of the 150 in backlog already. So we know that there's been a suppressed installation rate compared to historical when it was fully staffed with 3 network technicians. For a while it dipped down to, I believe, 2 and maybe even 1 at one point. So that's not going to be very conducive to getting installations done. So it's good news that at least for the runway that it appears they're approaching full staffing.
So Mark, can I just interrupt and ask, so are you suggesting that the take rate then is depressed because you can't make the installations, as opposed to more of a marketing and a messaging problem?
Yes, they have 100 installation requests in backlog. In other words, work in process.
Okay, so do you know what the take rate would be if they didn't have that problem?
So I guess in rough numbers, if they're at 1,500, what was that number?
1402.
1,535 total,
Yeah.
including businesses and add another 100 to that would be 1,635 in round numbers.
Yeah.
And I think that we decided that I'm gonna get this wrong, but I thought we had more like 6,600 premises.
Right. That's about right, Mark.
Yeah. So
But just to interject for a second, they will catch up with the backlog, but once the cold weather comes, then we still have the issue then of a potentially increasing backlog during cold weather.
yeah. Yeah, there's definitely a couple of months when installations slow down during it. So my rough math is roughly almost 24% of potential,
Okay.
would be, so I just did 1,535 over 6,600 and came up with 20.247.
I was
It would be
thinking
worth-
in terms of defining what take rate is. It doesn't really actually apply here because of the backlog and because of the inability to actually install as many as are requested. But if we tracked requests, then when fiber came into a particular street, how many people actually ask about it?
Yeah.
And we're not actually tracking that. or they're not tracking that now because it didn't fit in their database. But that they understand the value of it, and I think that they're trying to change the way that they're approaching that, so that it would become a little more plausible to create a take rate based on inquiries, to kind of broaden the definition a little bit.
Of course, where you're going with all this would be revenue, right? So, I mean, the take rate is what's driving revenue. So that's really where you need to focus, which is how much revenue do you need at a 20% margin, and how much does that give you as far as funding growth? So that, because that's where your growth is going to need to be funded from. And so, the take rate drives the revenue. The revenue is but from that you derive how much you've got left over to take the next step.
Yeah.
There was something in the report that Gordon sent, if you could throw it back up, Mark, which I didn't quite understand.
Oh, sorry.
If you could scroll down, please.
Mm-hmm.
There's something about something that went out that they got no response to.
Yeah, so as I understand it, at one point during the pandemic, they thought they had, was it 300 or even 450, Gordon?
I think it was around 300.
Yeah, it was around 300 outstanding requests for people who would ask for service.
Okay.
And what they did when they decided that they were ready to start doing installations again, they actually suspended installations for much of 2020.
Okay.
When they started to install again, they of course contacted all those people who had said they were interested, and they only got responses from 150 of them.
Okay.
So, I mean, that's a good example in my mind of the situation where if you respond slowly to a potential customer or not at all,
They're lost.
that you will lose that opportunity. So a bunch of stuff fell out of the pipeline. And I think like many businesses, we need to view the most recent, 24 months is, or at least, 19 months is something of an anomaly. So I think things were pretty normal through the end of 2019. Then we got into the normal sort of wintertime slowdown, which is January, February, March in this business. And by the time that would have started to pick back up for the year, we were in lockdown.
Okay.
So certainly the pattern over the first 4 or 5 years was we would sometimes get, close to 40 installations per month. And we were managing a backlog of roughly 60, usually around 2 months worth of people that had made inquiries, and were, I think, a key metric for a business like this, of course, is how quickly can you actually go from a customer inquiry to an actual installation. There's the wall time, how long the process actually takes to execute end to end, and how much actual effort is there in there. So obviously, if you can head out with a piece of fiber the second somebody calls and have them installed in 24 hours, that may be very expensive to do, but you can end up delighting customers and getting good word of mouth on it. The rest of this report,
I think those are great suggestions, Mary. And I would add to marketing actually something closer to sales.
Mm-hmm.
And by that, I mean, I'm not keen to offer a condo, Concord Broadband money, ratepayer money, not ratepayer money, but subscriber money to onboard, a bunch of condo owners, just to pay them to get on board. But if it could break the ice and enough people do come on board, then maybe with a certain amount of spending and a certain kind of deal, structure it in a certain way, solve certain barriers to adoption, which maybe involve convenience or whatever other things. This is where a salesperson, someone who actually has the ability to actually make a deal and know what a good deal is and what a bad deal is and what would be unfair to the incumbent participants in the program, because we're giving the new people a deal. But that's what you do when you pay a salesman a sales commission, right? This is money that really should come to the company. I'm sorry, I may not be explaining this very carefully in terms that would make sense to a municipality, but I'm talking about how do you break a logjam
No,
and get to a beneficial result where both sides benefit. And some of those deals wouldn't be good, right? If we paid, say, all of the installation costs for a particular condo and then two people signed up, nobody's going to get any pats on the back for that. So and it's anyway,
exactly.
it's just hard to kind of express that in a policy that we could just publish on the website. It kind of needs to be more dynamic, and that
I agree.
David Wood can do that kind of dealing, but he's got a lot of other things going on. So
That's a really good point, that it's not necessarily sales, it's more negotiating and finding out a common ground that benefits both parties, right? And that's going to be tough. I mean, I've run the numbers just based on what I knew from Concord Green, and I don't want to get down I don't want to focus on Concord Green all the time, but that's a tough needle to thread as far as modeling. What kind of an incentive, how many people, what's the take rate you need, and what's the payback you would expect from that investment? It's not as attractive a moneymaker as the broadband business has been enjoying up till now. It's a tougher.
Unless you could get all 200 residents to subscribe, then it would be like a payday. And we could also implement it probably. I mean, I'm not technical on this matter, but maybe we could get it built really quickly and move 200 people through in a month, which would be better than we've ever done.
Then these are all the assumptions that you would have to model, and let me,
And you can structure it in a manner.
Another thing that you brought up at a previous meeting that's a huge barrier is when people get all three services from Comcast, they don't know how to split off the services now and get the phone one way, the Wi-Fi another way, the cable another way. It took us over a year to figure it out. So if each homeowner is having to figure all that out individually, but if you could offer a webinar or whatever, and hundreds of people could learn how to do it. And this was something you guys talked about at a previous meeting.
Yeah. Let me go to the point that Gordon and Mary was making, because I think it's a good one. So just at high levels, and our typical customer spent about around $72 a month was the average. If you took those different service levels and did the weighted average, you get to about $72. And if you look at the historical cost that was spent connecting individual customers to the network, you could go around and round about it, but for easy numbers, let's call it costs us about $2,000 to actually connect each individual residential subscriber. And what that meant was we would then, charge them $72 a month on average, and it costs us $2,000. That gives us a roughly 27-month payback period, and we would charge them $150 up front. So in round numbers, let's call that a 25-month payback period. 25, and that was one of the reasons why, when the original system was put together, we asked people for a 2-year commitment right up front. And this is all numbers that drop out of the model that Scott actually showed us the other day. So, and we said that there was an early termination fee. That termination fee was only $400, and it declined $10 a month throughout our, I think it was $10 a month throughout the first 2 years or something. I've forgotten maybe it was $250 or something. It ended up being $400. But anyway, the point was to try and get people to commit to be there for 2 years. And we knew that if we did that, we would at least break even on their installs. And it turned out that the percentage of cancellations was minuscule, 1-2%, mostly the move in, move out rate. And a lot of times when somebody moved out, somebody else would move in and they would take the service, and it didn't cost you anything near the $2,000 again, because the fiber was already there. And so that business built itself up fairly nicely. And the reason
That was assuming that the customer was paying about $1,500 to trench to their home. Is that correct?
well, that was assuming you didn't need to do that trenching at all. So
Okay.
you remember, we were doing low hanging fruit. So we were doing overhead and people that already had conduit. So
Okay,
this was the $2,000 after there was already a path.
Right. Okay.
So
That's-
where I was going with all of this is, one filter or program that could be put in place is something that says, hey, as long as we, based on a model or on committed orders, expect a 25-month payback period, whatever the installation project was, maybe that's okay. Maybe that's good business for Concord Light, because you know, and if you modeled Concord Green, for example, and I'm probably should have, well, we're going to do this on the fly. So let's say there's roughly 200 residents in Concord Green, and you know, even let's take a conservative, 20% take rate. So 200 times 0.2, that's 40.
Yep.
If I
Yep. Go ahead.
So you got 40 residents, and that essentially means, if you could get that area done, and again, we're using our $2,000 per installation.
I don't
kind of
believe that
bench-
number, Mark. Mark, I don't believe that number.
That's the historical cost of doing installations just in other places.
And Mary, we may be able to nail down that number before we proceed with a deal. So
Okay, are we trying to figure out the revenue we're generating?
No,
here?
all I'm saying is that, based on Concord Light's history, if
Yeah.
you could get that installation done for $80,000, you could reasonably expect a 20% take rate. Let's say you enabled everybody, and you'd probably do that business because it's just as profitable, or the outlook for it is just as good as anything you've already done in other parts of the community.
yeah, let me
think,
put it
Mary,
a
you have
different
to-
way, that we could actually maybe put when our summary findings, that we could talk about like basis for a good deal or a bad deal. And we could say,
Right.
hey, a good deal is one with a payback time of under 3 years, preferably 2 years.
Yeah, I think, Mary, you have to assume that the 20% take rate is concentrated, because you couldn't do a 20% take rate scattered in Concord Green at an $80,000 install rate.
Yeah, I mean, based on our knowledge right now, we
Laid out
would
that way.
say
So
we
what-
probably couldn't actually do that project for 80,000, therefore we
Right.
shouldn't do it. But what I'm
Right.
saying is, if you did, let's hypothetical project A gets you 40 customers for $60,000 worth of construction, you would do that project because based on our history with customers, it's gonna pay back.
I
And
guess I would strongly recommend that instead of thinking of history, you
Yeah.
think of moving forward. And
Mhm.
moving forward is, what do you have in front of you? And right now, for example, you've got multi-unit dwellings in front of you, or
Right.
you've got, and what does it cost you to get those customers? Not what did it cost you to get the low-hanging
Yeah.
fruit, but
Mhm.
what is it going to cost you to do the next,
Yeah.
the next installation, the next phase, if you will?
Well, the
Because
marginal profit the marginal cost of delivering the service, I think, is going to drop. This is the virtual circle that that Scott likes to talk about. And if we cover the whole town, because the thing is, you're taking basically a fixed cost and amortizing it over a larger and larger base.
Are you? Because it looks, when I looked at your financials, it looked like a lot of your costs were variable. When I tried, the only fixed costs that I could see were depreciation expense, interest or debt service, and the other costs to me looked very variable.
Well, we've got the cost of installation, but which you need, bucket trucks and line techs, but
Right.
the cost of the routers and all of that technology, the subscriptions to bring in 20 gigabytes, that's all. Once we're committed to that. So basically, Mart, the cost of the next customer with respect to what we're already spending on routers and bandwidth is zero.
Wouldn't we see though that as revenue went up, that profit margin would improve over the last 4 years if that was true?
Yeah.
But in fact,
It
it pretty much
does.
stayed flat.
It does.
And that's because we're growing.
Yeah.
Well, you're not really. You're
Yeah, we've gone from
Last
0 to
year-
15
last
to,
year
well, I know
wasn't
COVID sucked,
last year
but
wasn't a growth year.
That's true. And installation stopped, and yet the staff was still there. They, it needed to be paid. And so, that's why what I was saying before is that the most recent, really 2 fiscal years are not that useful and represent an interruption in the growth curve that was in evidence up through 2019.
You make I think you make a really good point that there are variable costs that will grow as revenues grow, and then there are fixed costs that will just stay flat. And as growth, they're not going to go up. When I looked at your financials, I couldn't easily separate that out. And that was based on my own ignorance of what does this cost mean? What is I don't know, I can't even remember the words. So I only pulled out the ones I knew were fixed.
yeah.
So if you could do that, if you could say that for every incremental dollar that we bring in for revenue, right?
Yeah.
Instead of us keeping only 20% of that, we're going to keep 40% of that, right? Because we've already absorbed the fixed costs, then that makes it a whole lot easier to fund expansion. So
Yeah.
that would
In
be
fact,
a work.
I'd almost even try rephrasing the thing that I said earlier about, a project is good if the payback is under, 2 years.
Yeah.
But the other way to look at it is actually get rid of the dollar signs and look at it in terms of resource utilization, resource availability, and scarcity. We actually right now are in a resource scarce situation because the backlog is so large. We can't clear it because we don't have the resources. So what I'm trying to say is, instead of that earlier metric, you'd say, okay, we've got a set of different projects that we can do. Which ones of those will get us the most customers given the amount of resources that we have right now to prioritize it? It's kind of related to dollars, but it says how many bucket trucks do you need? How many, how many people do you need to actually say implement Concord Green or whatever? It's kind of the same idea, but it recognizes the fact that we're actually not going to go out and get more people, right? We're pretty fixed right now. I don't think there are any more open recs, and now it's a question of seeing if we can perform. Also, how can we do better with the resources that we do have?
Yeah, I wanted to jump in. I think the discussion about barriers to subscription growth and why I put that in the Warren article was like to get more of the low-hanging fruit. I mean, people don't even know that this is an offering, and so there are tons of streets around town where I'm sure neighbors haven't talked to each other. They don't know that people have fiber, and just one real estate agent. Oh shoot. I'm getting a limit here. Hold on a second. Am I still here?
Yeah.
Okay. Okay, sorry. I got a flyer from a local real estate agent that they welcomed 100 new people, celebrated the holidays last year. Well, that's just one real estate agency. So there's 100 new people in Concord. I wonder how many of those have fiber. I wonder how many even know about it. So I just think that there's a lot of
Mhm.
easy ways to get new people that we haven't even tried, like we being the town, CMLP hasn't tried, because they're just, as we discussed earlier, they're just not set up for doing marketing. So that's kind of where I was going with the barriers to subscription growth. Like, let's talk about, like, why don't people, like, it's really like a barrier to the take rate not being higher.
Mhm.
How do you get more people to take what's available, which
Yeah,
should be cheap?
I
So what-
agree. From
if I
that
could just-
Well, I
Sorry,
was just going to mention that when there were only 3 technicians, we, fairly regularly exceeded 30 installations a month in, say, 2017, 2018, 2019. So now if there are 4 technicians, I would be I would assume that it would be reasonable to target that 40 installations per month could be done, and that there would be enough demand for that. And in time periods when we had that sort of demand, there was really active word of mouth also working, that, Concord Light Broadband was there, people liked it, and were coming. The main thing that we turned people away for was the conduit issue. So there was a significant number of people who expressed interest, who then discovered they were in one of these underground areas, or maybe needed something, in their particular lot that made it look like it. And so we've now enumerated a great deal of those. But I would think that with 4 technicians and 2 network engineers, they should be able to exceed anything that's ever been done in the past, and that hasn't happened yet.
I've got to leave. I'm sorry.
Okay,
I gotta
thank
go
you,
to-
Mary.
So thank
Yeah,
you
thank
for
you.
Thanks.
Great
Thank you.
contribution.
considering what I said. Good night.
Yes,
Yeah,
David.
thank you.
I got thinking about take rates for the past few days. One of the thoughts that came to my mind, and I don't know if I'm on target or off target, is that we live in a relatively affluent town.
Mhm.
And I'm not sure or convinced that people are concerned about the dollar size of their Comcast bill.
Hmm.
And we've talked about, you can get CMLP for X amount of dollars, and then you tag on whatever services you want. But the question that came to my mind are people who don't move from Comcast to CMLP, do they really care about the size of their Comcast bill?
Well, I do.
I'm not saying.
I mean, the thing, I haven't done it recently, and maybe I haven't done it in 5 years, but there was this little dance that we would always dance between the 2 of us. I'd call Comcast and tell them I'm going to quit.
Right.
And they say,
I
well,
understand.
and the thing is, having Concord Broadband as an available option makes that dance work a lot differently than it would otherwise.
But my question is, do our residents who are not on the take rate consider their Comcast still to be their car payment, their other utility bills, whatever it may be, and this to say, hey, so it's $200 a month. It's just a part of the overhead of their living, and that it's not a painful expense enough to take on the switch. And I'm just throwing that out there.
I
The
think
other question, right?
Oh,
I'm sorry.
if you want a response to that one, if you can hold the other question, I will,
Sure.
because it's related to Terry's. People really do, I think, almost more than. So I wrote an article for an insert into the CMLP flyer when we used to get actual bills in the mail.
Right.
That sort of broke down how you could replace the triple play with Concord Light Broadband for internet. You could subscribe to Vonage or UMA or one of these IP telephone services, and then you could either buy an antenna and get free over-the-air TV, or you could subscribe to a number of packages. And for most people, that represented, if you just put the broadband and the phone system on it, then you usually had $100 to play with that you could sign up for streaming services and so forth, was what it came down to. Relative, and a lot of people did that. That said, it still wasn't exactly easy. And there was not, especially back in 2014, there weren't live TV options like there are now. And, you can go to Best Buy and buy a TV set that already knows how to find all the live TV services and, just plug it in. So I think those barriers have come down substantially, but they're not zero. And I think that I think people have a frustration about how much they're paying for these services, but that level of frustration isn't quite enough for the frustration of trying to figure it all out themselves.
Okay,
and
way of putting it, right.
save $30 a month, because it's not it's not 200 or zero, it's
Right.
200 or 120,
Right.
something like that.
Have you
So the
heard,
other-
Mark, the term cord cutters?
Yes.
Yeah, sure.
And yeah, and for a while, I think that there's a broad perception that you can save a fair amount of money by cord cutting.
Mhm.
But now, even NBC has a streaming service, Peacock, and it's proliferated, and each has its own $10, $15, $20
Yeah.
a month fee. I don't think that people are really saving money cord cutting anymore.
Mhm.
It's hard to.
Yeah.
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 Well, it's certainly easy to sign up for a lot of things you don't use, just like cable.
My other question, Mark, or anybody, is we talked about Provo, Utah, and other towns who were not successful. Do we have many models of towns that have been successful at the size of Concord?
At last count, there are around 20 or so municipal broadband projects just in the state of Massachusetts.
Okay,
There are hundreds across the country,
okay,
which doesn't mean that there are not a lot that are a really good match. And there are certainly some communities that were kicking the tires. For example, Wellesley was starting a project. They've probably started it by now. I haven't checked in on them in a year or so. But they would be a community that you would consider quite comparable to
Yeah.
Concord. They had the anchor institutions of a university in town that was kind of helping the town and using their fiber, and they also have a municipal electric utility. But there are definitely some communities that are fairly comparable. Everybody kind of built it their own way, so the exact approaches aren't always comparable, and there are some that literally started with a cable plant, like Shrewsbury or Braintree.
Yeah, I guess
the other odd thing is just that Comcast actually, in a way, embraces streaming services too, and that you don't need a Roku or an external box or even a smart TV. You can just use the Comcast platform.
Right.
Yeah.
The
How do we
thought I
differentiate ourselves against that?
the other thought which I had, which is not that something the committee to do, but when I was a business school student, and this is perhaps a recommendation we could make, when we were in, I think it was our first semester, second year, we had to go out and do a business school project typically it was not in a town government setting. But I would recommend that we seek out a business school to assign the easy kind of information to gather why people aren't signing up, what are the barriers to resistance. So, those things that we've talked about, we haven't really figured out, I don't think, so much as a business school project for one of the local business schools. And you could have those students dig in and get that information that we don't have the time to do and will never reach by our deadline as a recommendation for future action.
Are you familiar with how to get something like that started?
Yeah, sure. I can make a phone call. I mean, yes, I can say you just call the, I was a graduate of Boston College. It's a small business center at Boston College. You call the dean's office. We have a project we'd like to engage your students with. Because they do senior year projects, and you kind of give them a thumbnail sketch.
Yeah.
And they post it, and you get the students to volunteer to do it.
When I was running the
project that
CSEC,
I had to do. I ended up being hired by the company, the project that I did,
Yeah.
or the group that we did it with.
When I was running, when I was the chair of the CSEC committee, I brought in Tufts University for a heat pump program.
Mhm.
But it took a little while to get that going. I think it was almost a year before the students actually had their assignments.
Right, you'd
And
have
so
to
it's-
talk about the class of 22, because the class of 21 has already been assigned, they're, already
I
engaged.
mean, 23 probably.
Yeah, 23, excuse me, yeah.
Yeah.
The
Yeah.
second year, no, wait a minute, no, the class of 22, yeah, 23, which would be
Yeah.
next fall's senior year or second year projects.
Might be an interesting thing to turn over. I remember Hugh Lauer had some of his students come
WPI.
in and do on a wind energy project.
Yeah, and if you get really serious, kids who have their nose to the ground, you'll get a good project out of them.
It might be something worth recommending.
Yeah, they might have a fresher take too on what's desirable, what's happening out there, and where the opportunities are. Of course, from the perspective of a student, so it may be a little different than the town. Here in Concord, the average age is over 50.
Yeah, I was going to say demographics is important here because we are looking at a population that skews older, and I think that does have something to do with enthusiasm for this, and find a 20-something that even wants to own a television set. They just if they can't watch it on an iPhone or a laptop.
Yeah.
And of course that I think actually plays well to fiber. But then again, find a 20-something that can afford to buy a property in Concord. Now you've got
Might be able to rent.
So there's kind of I think.
Yeah.
Well, I think something.
Go ahead.
Thanks. Yeah, I think something that I'm not sure which demographic would favor it, but something that most people could go for is just the idea of having choices and offering competition, because I think people understand that, if like Gordon was saying, we used to do that. We would negotiate with Comcast and say, well, we're going to drop it and get another internet provider. So I think people understand that if they have options, they're better off. And just, explaining that, there is an option and all this, the streaming, you can kind of make your own develop your own menu. And then what else was I going to say? Oh, then also but now you're paying, the money that you're paying goes to help the town, so it's not going to Comcast, which is some big multinational corporation. I feel good about writing a check to the town instead of to Comcast. And I think a lot of people would feel the same way.
One of the decisions we made quite early when we set up the pricing, if you notice throughout the 7 years, the pricing of the 4 service levels has never changed. What has changed is how much service you get for each of those prices.
Right.
So as bandwidth demand has grown and users have needed more bandwidth, we essentially dialed up the service. And so there was a kind of an entry level, and in fact, I think the package names were on that report, up to a very high level of service. I think it's 300 megabits per second or something, which is really suitable for, quite professional work. And that was a strong marketing point. And certainly when I presented this to town meeting, when we were looking for funding for the startup, one of the points I made at that time was that, we felt strongly that having a competitive option in town was going to, and I think that actually has, improve service levels for everybody because the competition had to respond with better service. And, and the other pricing policy that Concord Light has always pursued, and I wholeheartedly agree with this, is the price you sign up for is the price that you pay for as long as you have that service. You don't have to wait for some, 1-2 years down the road when suddenly the price ratchets up for the exact same thing you just got, and then you have to make an annoying phone call to some call center to get your price changed. And I think those testimonials are, do go a long way. And I think that we've gotten, especially in the face of, the limited capacity to build the service, we've gotten very far away from actually even promoting it at that level. And I do think that has been an inhibitor to the subscription growth recently.
That people don't know.
Yeah.
I think
Yeah.
that's, Gordon really just hit it, is that in my, I don't understand all the structures here. Broadband doesn't belong at, let me phrase this correctly, in quotes, broadband doesn't belong at CMLP. It's only there because it kind of started there. It should be a second, in my opinion, a separate division of CML, truly separate, with a marketing arm, a promotional arm. Let me just go back to Concord Green for a second, what you were talking about. Should someone be able to come to Concord Green and say, look, we'll do all the trenching, we'll do all the digging, we'll do all that stuff that's involved. If you guarantee us 50% sign-up rate, it's free.
Mm-hmm.
And if you get it at that rate before we do the work, we'll do it for nothing, because the 50% sign-up rate is 110 residents.
Yeah.
I think the payback is pretty good at that point. I'm just, making up numbers here, but
Yeah.
that's a promotional manufacturer's rep, if you will, sales rep, going out and selling product
Yeah.
with the return on investment.
Yeah, and maybe he knows when he leaves the door, the office door in the morning to go talk, that it's also a deal that could be implemented in the winter.
Right.
So,
And he knows,
whatever.
so it's a
Yeah,
whole
sure.
different arm of selling a I mean, at the end of the day,
Yeah.
broadband is a product that's competing with a very high product, a very, very high powered company that has a lock on the town. But you basically have a bow and arrow to compete with a tank. If I can give you the best analogy I can think of.
Yeah.
And your arms, your arm is tied behind your back in trying to make this happen.
Yeah.
And
Certainly-
it's not being critical, it's just the way it is.
Yeah. Though we do have the quote advantage that we're not a must carry. Comcast is, and there is a hazard, which is that if we actually succeed here and increase our the broadband participation to a significant fraction of Concord residents, then it will become unprofitable for Comcast, and at some point they may question the commitment that they made to be a must carry, and they could exit.
That would be a problem.
Yeah, so I mean, actually, strategically, we may not want to target more than with two things: either a particular fraction, or also the way that we present it. Like, if we present it as our mission is to kill, is to take away Comcast's business, that might get their attention. I probably shouldn't even be putting this into the video record, right? And I don't really think that hasn't been a problem, because we're not really eating away at their turf that quickly. But also, I think there's some downsides to being, anyway, I think you catch what I mean.
Yeah. By the way, I may ask a question. Can you have Comcast and broadband all in the same household?
Sure. And people do.
And that's really interesting, because I don't think that I certainly don't dwell on that as a scenario, but maybe we could develop that from a marketing point of view. And what that does is it says, hey, look, guys, you've got Comcast, you still want ours.
Right.
Because now I can't really fill in the blanks there, but an example could be, what if you have a household with 4 teenagers all streaming at the same time?
Right.
Do you want to bring another Comcast channel in or connection in, or why not diversify? Diversify. Resilience. Wouldn't you like to have a backup in case the main one blew and
Right.
the fiber? I'm sorry, forgive me, but I want to back up to a piece that I wanted to explain a second ago when I was talking about the term cord cutters. And I think that part of the reason why cord cutting was perceived to be, and actually was, a cost savings measure was because the ESPN bundle. And it turns out that in the American, cable or home TV market, ESPN and a couple of others have been part of the bundle, and they are extremely expensive.
Mhm.
And everybody pays for it, whether or not they're sports fans or not. And the problem is that, and so that's the big win. But it's not a big win for everybody, because actually in our house, we watch sports. We watch ESPN. You can't get all the baseball games. So the problem is that as the over the top, they call it anyway, as these streaming services, these subscription services have proliferated, cord cutting doesn't actually provide as big a cost savings as it has in the past.
If I can just quickly add to that, I without cutting Comcast, I tried the concept of cord cutting. I got the little flat thing that you put by your window so I could get my local channels.
Yep.
I got my local channels. But in the end of the day, it wasn't worth the effort. I couldn't change my bill significantly enough to reinforce what you're saying. Just, it didn't work.
Yeah.
But I only pay, as I said, 118, 120 a month for my Comcast service.
Well, you're well below me, so.
There are two
you're
trends that are going on that have an impact, I think, looking out into the future. One of them is that some of these, cable channel bundling deals that have made, cable television offering specifically so expensive, there's a lot of pressure to unravel those, and even from the cable companies themselves, because they realize the problem that they have, and people want to pick what they want to pick. The other trend, which we haven't even mentioned, but I think it's potentially significant in the timeframes that we're talking about, is the competitiveness of wireless service offerings. And it used to be that people just worried about 5G, which may be a concern. Particularly Verizon is trying to make investments in that, and whether that fixed wireless may become competitive. But I think what wasn't even on the horizon, or above the horizon in this case, is the space-based satellite. Before, the old satellite services were just not useful for anything interactive, because the geostationary satellites were so far away, the latency was unacceptable, so nobody used it for internet. But now with the Starlink service that SpaceX is putting out, which is available in our community, and as well as I guess Amazon is talking about doing that, we do have to become concerned that there's somebody else that's likely to show up sometime in the near future, offering essentially the same thing, which is high-speed internet. Right now, I think Starlink costs $100 a month for a 100 megabit service, and that's a new competitive and potentially a barrier to subscription growth. I always assumed that the market was likely to be carved in thirds. I always thought CMLP was likely to get to about a third. Comcast would continue to have a third, and then some combination of everybody else would have the other third. But and the reason to some extent I came to that by looking at some of the other municipal systems that had been around a while. Braintree was particularly interesting because they have two fairly, RCN and somebody else, Verizon, I think, Fios, and themselves all competing in the same town, and that's what ends up happening. Everybody has a third. and people play the other two off against the middle all the time and chase rates, and which frankly seems incredibly inefficient, but that's how it ended up being for them. So I think that there's a real possibility that kind of environment may play out in a lot of places, certainly in more rural communities than ours. The satellite-based systems are likely to be quite popular because of the distances involved.
Is that a significant threat, you think, Mark, or just a threat? I mean, long term, 10
Right
years.
now, it's a threat. I call it emerging competition that didn't exist before.
Okay.
And I think at least the reading that I've done is that some of the wireless services are just not as reliable. Like they don't work as well in the rain and things like that. So, my family would never rely on something like that, so
Yes.
I think fiber wired broadband is the best solution that you could possibly get. So, and I think there are a lot of other people who agree with that. So, there are reasons, to do fiber that,
Yeah.
Well,
And that's
let me
the main
just
marketing
expand we're talking about, barriers to adoption. And this is in the context of a task force that's focused on trying to increase the uptake. But in the broader, if you take a step back and look at a broader period of time, eventually we're going to reach steady state, and then it'll be barriers to, it'll be how do we prevent people from quitting? And actually, some of the same thought processes apply to both, which is value related. Are we competitive? Are we offering the right value in the marketplace? That matters in terms of getting people excited about signing up with the program. Involves keeping them after we've actually had them. And they're not that different, and they're also affected by the competitive landscape. So, I don't have an experience in this industry to know where some of the really exciting emerging value propositions are. Gail, you just mentioned one of them, which is in terms of that we can offer superior reliability. I think Comcast might be able to too, but particularly like with rainstorms and wireless flakiness and all that. But there may be other things too that we can try to think about. I don't know if we'll make progress on that in the context of this short-term project, but it's something we really need to keep an eye on forever, and make sure that we don't get pushed out of a successful business and marginalized by just sort of resting on our laurels. And
yeah, one other thing to think about is the synergies between fiber and electric rates, like metering. There are some communities, I think Chattanooga has fiber pretty much throughout the whole town, and they also have a municipal utility, and they have synergies with the fiber and the metering. And then also, as communities move more toward, I think it's called distributed energy, where they might be creating their own energy with solar panels or whatever and sharing that, you're going to want to have the fiber link. That's the best way to manage that. So that's something, for the future that would provide value.
I would describe that as a ubiquitous fiber network as the platform for improved electric services.
Yes, and potentially other services like educational services. It was always one of my hopes that eventually the availability of fiber might be so good that, we talked about all the challenges that students had with pandemic learning, but if you have a school sitting in the middle of a community which is serving that geographic area as a school department, it's actually fairly within the realm of possibilities that you could create a large, secure, private network that literally included the school children at their homes if they're connected to the fiber system, which, you know, means essentially virtually unlimited bandwidth for the purposes of you know, remote education, which, you know, always seemed like a little pie in the sky until, you know, a year and a half ago, everybody went home and tried to do it.
Well, that's I connect that to with security and the idea of isolation. We could have a perimeter around our community,
Yeah.
not unlike a microgrid, where we could sort of Concord could be an island, or a part of Concord could be an island.
I mean, certainly for organizations that operate in multiple locations within the community, like the private schools and the public school and the town itself, and there's a few. We were, you know, and have been able to do some of those. I think when we looked at that broadband report, that, you know, business enterprise customers, 14 of them are basically, each one of those is a, you know, a custom deal. I don't know if it's appropriate to name them, but suffice to say that some private schools with locations distributed around the town are using Concord Light services to communicate between their buildings privately and securely over the fiber network. And that's a level of simply engagement with the community that I think has, you know, fairly major, you know, economic benefit. You know, and to Gail's point about synergies with the electric grid, this, you know, if you think that there are, I think it's like 50 large electric customers in Concord that, you know, we looked at the rates this morning, right, Gordon, with the G3 biggest customers. Some of those customers also have telecommunications needs, and some of them, you know, that so the package is you get municipal electricity with the reliability and the cost of that, and you also have access to this, you know, essentially world-class networking facility. That's the kind of thing that encourages higher occupancy in the commercial properties, because, you know, to the extent that we barely market anything to residents, we're even less top of mind amongst some of the businesses, and that I think is another area that could be developed. And of course that, you know, ultimately is actually a higher return business for the broadband business even than residential services.
Well, what I love about the direction the conversation has taken is that, you know, we're trying to think about ways that Concord Broadband can offer superior value. And what we're talking about here, what we've identified right off the bat, is a set of opportunities that exist because we are Concord Broadband in Concord. Yeah. And so we can respond to things that, like, a multinational or international or satellite company would never even, they wouldn't even think of us. Mm-hmm. So there's some security there, but there's also locality. You know, the local perspective is a very powerful one.
Mm-hmm.
I had a question. I attended the CMLP meeting this morning, and Greg Marsnick, when he was doing his broadband update, said something about being independent of the town's network. Mark, do you remember that discussion? I was confused about what he meant by that. He was talking about the upgrades, like core upgrades for the fiber.
So the town operates servers at two different, you know, server rooms in town buildings, and the broadband network is basically centered or has its core at one of the power substations, which is where the fiber all comes back to. And some of the services that support the broadband network, like, for example, DHCP, which is simply the handing out of public IP addresses, were operating on servers that were actually running in the town data center. And I believe what Greg was referring to was an effort that they've made to use some hardware appliances and co-locate those hardware appliances with the network switches and routers in the core, in the substation, and outside of the Concord town network. So rather than using the town's virtual server infrastructure, which is not co-located with the routing core, they're moving it all in one place, which I understand that impulse. There's a fiber ring with a lot of redundancy to do that. And it's one of those things where you could probably debate that. The biggest concern that I have is that you may be introducing other single points of failure, like what happens if that one core location somehow becomes compromised or unavailable, or what's the plan for that? And the reality is that when you have a network, if it has a network center and it doesn't have multiple centers, you kind of always have that exposure. The question is, how many eggs do you have in that basket? So that's probably the best answer I can give without actually having seen the specifics of what they're doing. But from what he was saying, it struck me that because you referred to some appliances, and you can get hardware that does the same thing as software, and the hardware tends to be very efficient because it's more single purpose than the more general purpose servers that were in use before.
Yeah, I guess where I was going with that is because we're talking about like developing these private networks, but then at the same time they're talking about separating from the town's network. But maybe that discussion this morning was more about like a hardware thing and not so much about like the mechanics of how the communication gets around. Does that make sense?
And you can think of the fiber as like a road circuit service, and you can think of the networks as the lines that are painted on the road surface. Like if you took a huge flat area and just asphalted the whole thing, you could paint any number of courses, roadways, networks on top of that. So you can think of fiber in that sort of way. You can make networks appear at the end, at the tip of your fiber of any one or multiple networks coming into a single place, but they're all actually using that same strand of fiber, and they can be using multiple strands of fiber.
Okay.
So there's, it's kind of which layer of the stack are you kind of dealing with?
And I would just say, I got really excited about this idea of, setting up our own networks across town, but virtualization is actually kind of a simple alternative to our hardwired networks. And, just an example of where virtualization is extremely common is when you have to provide a password on a virtual private network to log into your workplace. Once you've done that, you could print a Word document, and it's going to pop out on the printer in that office downtown. I mean, you're in a sense virtually present in that office through the miracles of crypto, whatever.
And there's a version of that.
I'm just saying this virtual idea means that actually the physical implementation isn't the only way to get there, and we're kind of competing. The two ideas kind of compete with each other. They each have their own purpose, but I'm just saying it wouldn't be like a walk in the park for us.
Well,
necessarily.
It is already done. An example I always used to like to use was the public safety communications network. There are a series of antenna receivers on various tall buildings around town that receive the communications from the police cars and the fire trucks and stuff like that, and they're distributed. And that that multiple antenna system is kind of a voting network, and it's all connected back through a virtual private network on the fiber. And in some cases, that exact same fiber is also being used to provide internet or town services to that same building that has that antenna on it. So you can kind of mix and match the virtualization and the physical. It's the fiber physical network that enables all of that to happen, and provides people with access. really interesting study, where there's a community, and I'll look up the name in a second, where that's what they do. Their network offering is a fiber connection, and you go to this web portal, and from that web portal, you pick which internet service provider who they will turn on to your fiber you want. So, company A, company B, company C, company D are all able to be enabled through the exact same hardware device, and you just choose, and all of those companies are, that's what's called an open access network. And so if a competing internet service provider wanted to come in and start offering service to the Concord CMLP customers, or to Mary's point about, is it sustainable? At some point, CMLP could decide, hey, we're not running this anymore. We're just going to lease the fiber to somebody else and let them run it. And that's also a viable business plan, especially somebody who might want to, market it and things like that. And those are proposals that could be taken, at face value. Not that I'm suggesting that we should really do that, because I do believe local control is very valuable. But it is an option, and it's a method that some communities have done. There are some communities in Western Massachusetts. Holyoke Electric Company is a fairly large MLP out there, and they are providing the operating company that operates the broadband network on fiber in some of the adjacent communities like Chicopee, and Leverett, Massachusetts actually uses Holyoke services to run the network, but it's a remote, they own the physical fiber as a town. So there's several models along those lines that take advantage of the fact that a fiber network can be deployed for lots of purposes, supporting the electric grid. If people have distributed storage, there's no reason why that couldn't be offered as something that was private between the electric storage, the storage companies that were creating a virtual power plant, and the consumers. And there's sort of no internet on that, but it could still be enabled by the fiber network. So there are a lot of businesses opportunities and communication opportunities along those lines that could be developed that could potentially also be.
Here's an idea. It's like, what if there's some kind of cyber war?
Yeah.
And North Korea or China or Russia or Iran and any of the others attack. Here we are in the middle of a pandemic, and I don't know if you watched the news over the past decade, but occasionally I'd see a scare story or hear a scare story on NPR or whatever about what it's going to be like when a pandemic arrives. And I'd be like, I don't want to think about it. But here we are in it, and we've all collected such deep personal experience about what it's like to be dealing with this, and realizing that the person that existed 5 years ago would have no clue about all the stuff that I know now, we all know now. And I'm just trying to imagine, okay, so what is that person 5 years from now in the cyber war or whatever? What does he need to tell me? And I don't really know, but it's what I'm driving at is that there may be ways in which a local network like ours, with its ability to physically isolate from the dangerous outside world, could actually provide some opportunities. But then again, since people don't know about it, they probably wouldn't really be all that willing to pay for it, but might still be, if I knew what it was. Mark, you're a networking guy, you tell me, but I'll tell you that even if you do know the answer, probably it's unlikely that anybody else is going to want to buy it because nobody knows about it yet. I don't know. I guess that was a dead end, wasn't it?
Well, no, I think that, it's not unrealistic to think that satellites are going to be targeted, and that, and Comcast had some outage, a national outage, it hit like, I don't know, but then I think I read that it was weather related. But you know, the bigger you are, the more risks are introduced. So why not have this great local system that's resilient and offers a lot of
I agree.
good stuff for
Agree.
everyone.
And that's where we don't have to displace the others in order to actually provide, make this pitch. It's like you are actually better off with multiple gateways to the internet.
When I was certainly talking to businesses in Concord, if a business owner said, I'm a technology company and the most important thing to me is I need to have always on service, I would say, okay, me and somebody else. Because
there you go.
That what you really want to do is, any given provider is only as reliable as they are reliable, and your best protection from a resilience perspective is to have more than one provider, and I think that it's actually quite likely that these things can be delivered cost effectively, and maybe even if you're not so sure about that, if you're a high powered work at home person, maybe you do have more than one provider. Maybe you sign up for the lowest service level for $50 a month. You have that service level, and the reality, and this might be another marketing point, is if you want to go from the lowest service level to the highest service level, even in the middle of a pandemic or a snowstorm, if you call the service center, they, through a series of mouse clicks, can change you, and that change takes place immediately, and now you've got more service once you're connected in the first place. So that ability and responsiveness, and we never charged anybody anything for changing their service level up or down, and that because we just felt like people should be allowed to right size it.
Did anybody lose power a weekend or two ago?
Oh yeah.
Did you also lose data?
There was a bit of a recycle of the. Actually no, my service was up. You're talking about on Sunday, right? The day that the truck or whatever it was hit the poles and snapped them off.
Yeah.
No, the internet was up because it was on battery backup, so it stayed up.
And that was Concord Broadband, right?
Yeah.
That you have, yeah. I didn't think to check it before my UPS ran out of juice. My bet is that Comcast service continued, but I don't know for sure.
Yeah, we didn't have power for a few hours.
Yeah, but again, anyway, power outages are not unheard of, and particularly ones having to do with hitting telephone poles, where again, a diversity of sources can, can be, and people could appreciate that.
Okay. Before we take the opportunity for comments, it's coming up almost 8 o'clock. Any thoughts or discussion about our next meeting and the subject for it? I know we've talked about this. I think that I still would go back to the agenda and say metrics. What are the take rates of subscriber networks? How many new installations are performed? How long does it take to do an installation? I really do think it would be sensible for tracking that. I have made the request, and I will repeat it to Greg, to try and get at the data for the service requests that have come up. I know that they have limited coding for what happened there, but I think even the raw numbers we could make something out of. So I will ask for that again. And then I was thinking about shifting gears to the fourth of our 4 areas, so that we've covered them all at least once before we come back to sort of beginning to think about how we might summarize. And that was the additional issues related to mission, business, financial practices. So I was thinking that I would put that topic on for the Thursday after Thanksgiving. Anything else anyone feels we should be addressing in our next session, which is 2 weeks from tonight?
I'm sorry, that was the one on financial practices?
Yeah, so I can share this, but if you remember, going back to when we did the focus areas, we've been talking about, actually, sorry, we were on B, barriers to subscription growth. So C, I feel like we've talked about C quite a bit, but this is the fiber to the home, aka last mile. So this is co-ops and condos and issues related to installation of fiber in common areas. So we've hit that in almost every session. So I was feeling like section D here. I'm going to zoom this out a little bit because I feel like it's too small. Was something that we had talked about in our focus areas, and I don't really think that we've taken much of a discussion in any of these areas just yet. So I was going to propose that we might try to focus next meeting on what we might presume about all of these areas.
And that would be fine with me. Just a question as to the meaning of little a there, how citizens should express their preference. Does this mean like, should we have a survey or a mailing or call people? Is that what you were thinking? Or
yeah, I think that so related to the main topic, which is what is, if we asked ourselves the question of what is the real mission and what financial and business policies do we think that Concord Light Broadband specifically should be pursuing? For example, universal, like universal access, is it a goal for Concord Light Broadband to provide access to every address or not? And do we think we know the answer to that? And B, if we don't know the answer to that, how do we find out? And I think to some extent it might turn out to be ask the citizens in some way, shape, or form. Or ask somebody else that represents the citizens to come up with that. And then, to the point about how easy is it to turn over, how easy is it to convert to CMLP? A lot of that has to do with the fact that television is not an offering. Voice is not an offering. So what are those choices and how they get made? These are sort of, real policy questions about the goals of the service that I feel like, absent anything else, staff will just decide, and maybe that's okay. Maybe the citizens' decision is that staff should decide. It's that sort of questions about.
Yeah, it's like a visionary business will sometimes actually not really be survey based at all. It'd be
right.
like, build it and they'll come. If you asked them if they want to go to there, they wouldn't say so because it hasn't been built yet. So there's a chicken or the egg sometimes with some of these things. The other question, we had questions about the organizational structure or organizational issues, representation and so forth, governance. Should it be its own enterprise, for instance? That would belong in here, but I don't really want to poke that bear. Personally,
we may decide that some of these things are not in the scope, but these were topics that came up when we first started discussing the scope of this, and I think they were at least in part implied by the charge and the article, but maybe not. And so I thought it would be important because at some point we were going to have to start shifting from where we are now to what kind of report are we writing and what are the topics that are going to be covered in that report. And I always feel like, if nothing else, a page that says, the task force considered these issues and decided they were out of scope, at least inoculates us against the what about kind of questions that some people will ask.
Another thing, I don't know if it fits into this, but would this committee or task force have any business suggesting a follow-on? Like, if you were to convene us again, this is what we'd suggest doing. I actually kind of tend away from that because I think that ultimately this stuff belongs in the hands of staff and the light board, because they're the ones that actually are running it and have the governance responsibility. And we can come in and make some recommendations and so forth, but we're not gonna actually chase that home to ground.
Yeah, I mean, simply recommending that the light board consider these kinds of things right alongside your rate strategies or something else, is maybe plenty of artifact for this particular.
Yeah, but there could be some things we'd suggest. So yeah, maybe we want the light board to have dedicated meetings or something like that. But again, that's governance.
So let's so we'll try and work our way through that list next time. I guess will be the primary thing, and we'll have updates on some of the outstanding ideas. And then I would suggest we begin trying to refocus on what the final deliverables are, so that we're on some kind of path to get there. With that, I'm ready to take some public comments if you guys are. Okay. Anybody want to join us? Vince, would you like to?
Yeah, I don't know, Mark, if you had a chance to spot an email that I sent you. It's probably a couple of hours ago, but it had to do with a couple of points. But the main one for this evening was taking the minutes for your meetings, because I know you're on this rotating scheme of taking the minutes. And I've been experimenting on the PEG Access Advisory Committee with a semi-automated tool for taking the minutes. It's a third-party service called Otter AI. That's Otter as in the little wiggly animal. And AI is an artificial intelligence. And I guess AI is now a domain name. So their URL is otter.ai. But it's turned out to be quite successful. And what it allows you to do, and this can even be done after the fact, is either record a meeting while it's in progress, or take the audio from that meeting after the meeting and have it basically go through the whole meeting and create an automated transcript. And one of its very nice features, which is clearly only going to improve, is that you can go through a training phase where you can tell it who the speaker is. And it will actually recognize the speaker by, their voice patterns. And it's pretty good at it. It's taken me a couple of meetings for the PEG Access Advisory Committee to, get to the point where it will do the voices automatically. But what I've done for the past couple of meetings is not even tried to seriously write down, the minutes of the meeting while it's taking place, but I've just tried to capture all the highlights and when there were votes required a roll call. And then after the meeting was over, I let the thing run through its automated transcript and then just took some excerpts from that to kind of create a summary of the meeting. But anyway, I'd highly recommend it. And as a matter of fact, you can even try it with the meeting that's going on right now, because I've kind of upgraded the subscription one level for myself just so that it will record any length of meeting. But if you want to do that, I'll give it a start and pass on whomever the clerk is tonight, and we can go through a little session on it.
Okay.
Thank
That's
you.
an interesting open. Gail, are you interested?
Perhaps, yeah. Like, I'm not like a big adopter of new technology, like my old ways of doing things, but
Okay.
yeah, I might.
Shouldn't have put you on the spot, but
Well,
okay.
that's one of the things is that actually potentially it's going to work even for non-tech people. The previous member of the PEG Access Advisory Committee was Ruth Lauer, and I don't know how many of you know Ruth, but you know she's done the cycle of most of the committees in town, and she takes excellent minutes. I mean, you know, she is a standard for good minutes taking, and she does it basically without any tech at all. Oh, I think more recently she's been using the YouTube transcript because it's an easy way. I mean, you know, the YouTube broadcast because it's an easy way to, you know, kind of check in on what the facts were. So this potentially is even for non-technical people.
Well,
And
I take you up on it if you'd be willing to run your software on the Lightboard meeting this morning.
yes, that's entirely possible.
Okay.
Okay, that'd be
Good.
great because I'm on the hook for those. But I don't mean to take it away from you, Gail. But I could use it, and you know, I think I might share it with the staff because they have a transcription assignment that is it's all of this is a burden, gladly borne.
Okay. It sounds
So
like
Mark,
a good.
there's a couple of links that I sent you in that earlier email. One is to the kind of the history of this project. It actually goes back a couple of years to 2018 when the primary motivation of the town manager at the time, which was Chris Whalen, was to try to get more of the committee meetings in town, you know, recorded and in particular up on YouTube. And so this started back then, and it kind of almost got started, but then there was complications late in 2019, then COVID hit. And so this is now just resuming, but fortunately the technology has gotten a lot better in the meantime too. It's just amazing what's happened even in the course of a few months
Okay.
relative to the speech to text stuff.
Well, speech to text is certainly improving. So I'll share that email, and it sounds like Gordon's at least interested, and Gail might be interested adjacent. Joan.
Thank you. Thank you all. First, I want to thank you all. I think for the work you're doing. There's been some great discussion, I think, tonight. Very interesting. And, you know, I think you've raised so many good points. You know, how much public awareness is there of fiber optic broadband? What do people really know about it? They see broadband, and if you do a short survey, they will be ill-informed because there's much that they don't know. And including Gordon, you've raised some great points, and Mark, Gail, all of you, about the possibilities and the flexibilities with fiber optic broadband for the town and linking the entire town and perhaps building independent networks within the town. And so even just getting it in place and perhaps down the road, the flexibilities that can be, you know, that can evolve and having that infrastructure in place for the public is certainly a public good. I don't think anybody can argue with that. So that's, I think, you know, it's interesting in considering your mission. There was some discussion, as I recall, about, you know, whether to do a survey or whether to take the road that this is the mission, you know, that broadband should be installed townwide, and as a matter of a public service, public good, and then again, with more public awareness, more flexibility of what can be done with this kind of network and the safety of the network. We are in a different time. Gordon made a great point. None of us knew we were going to be facing a pandemic with the quarantine of March 2020, you know, came so suddenly. all of us have been affected, obviously, but and so the safety and the security of a local network really has a lot to commend itself. I think the public is perhaps more open and aware of that local control is really a good thing, certainly in the public health area in terms of communication, getting services out, connecting people for services and so on. So certainly really very interesting points you've raised, and a lot of possibilities here, a lot of directions for your recommendations to go in, and I just want to thank you again for all your work on it. I think it's been a very interesting meeting.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Okay. So I don't think we took any other votes today, but I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move to adjourn.
Second?
Thank you, David. Roll call, Gordon.
Aye.
David,
Aye.
Gail,
I.
and myself, aye. Well, thanks everybody for being here. It was an interesting discussion. So
Yeah.
we'll stand adjourned for 2 weeks. I hope everybody has a restful and safe, peaceful Thanksgiving.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank
You
you.
too.
Happy
Bye now.
Thanksgiving.